Well, it was. We had the knight's outfit, the helmet, the horse, the flag, the banner, everything, and I said he needs a sword.
Most people think The Lord of the Rings was simply another blockbuster, but one quiet moment behind the cameras revealed something far more remarkable. During the filming of The Return of the King, Peter Jackson was directing one of Saruman's final scenes, when Christopher Lee suddenly interrupted him. The legendary actor calmly explained that the sound Jackson wanted wasn't what actually happens when someone is struck from behind. The entire set fell silent, as Lee spoke from personal experience, not imagination. Standing nearby was Viggo Mortensen, who watched every word with complete attention. Years later, Mortensen admitted that this wasn't just another conversation between actor and director. It was the moment he realized Christopher Lee carried a lifetime of experiences that no acting school could ever teach. That unforgettable lesson stayed with him long after the cameras stopped rolling. But to understand why it meant so much, you first have to understand the unlikely journey that brought Viggo Mortensen to Middle-earth in the first place. Long before audiences knew him as Aragorn, Viggo Mortensen was living a life that looked nothing like a future Hollywood star. Born in New York City in 1958, he spent much of his childhood moving from country to country as his family searched for new opportunities. Venezuela, Denmark, and Argentina each became part of his early world, exposing him to different cultures, languages, and traditions, before most children had even settled into one hometown. Spanish eventually became as natural to him as English, and that curiosity about people and history never disappeared. After his parents separated, Viggo returned to New York with his mother and brothers, but he never lost the adventurous spirit those early travels had given him. Instead of chasing fame, he became fascinated by art, literature, photography, and the stories hidden inside different cultures. Those interests would later shape every role he accepted. But first, fate had one unexpected surprise waiting for him. After graduating from St. Lawrence University, Viggo didn't rush toward Hollywood. In fact, acting wasn't even part of a carefully planned career. He spent years drifting between countries, taking ordinary jobs, and trying to figure out where life was leading him. Everything changed almost by accident when he returned to New York, expecting to audition for what he believed was a stage production. Instead, he discovered he had walked into an acting school. What could have been an embarrassing mistake became the turning point of his life. Rather than walking away, he decided to stay and see where the opportunity might lead. Small film roles slowly followed, including a brief appearance opposite Harrison Ford in Witness. The role barely put his name on the map, but Viggo approached it with the seriousness of someone playing the lead. He wasn't interested in becoming famous overnight. He wanted to become believable. That mindset would soon separate him from almost everyone around him. While many actors searched for bigger paychecks or higher-profile roles, Viggo focused on something much harder to earn: credibility. Whether he appeared in a horror film, a crime drama, or an independent production that few people would ever watch, he committed himself completely. Directors quickly noticed that he refused to fake emotions or take easy shortcuts. If a scene demanded exhaustion, he pushed himself until the fatigue became genuine. If it required physical discomfort, he embraced it, instead of asking for special treatment. Critics occasionally praised his performances, even when the movies themselves received little attention, wondering why someone this dedicated hadn't already become a household name. Yet Viggo never seemed interested in chasing celebrity. He cared more about disappearing into each character than being recognized for playing them. Ironically, that quiet commitment was exactly what began attracting Hollywood's attention. And before long, one opportunity would change everything forever. By the late 1990s, Viggo Mortensen had built an impressive resume, but very few moviegoers could have picked him out of a crowd. He had worked alongside stars like Al Pacino, Denzel Washington, and Gene Hackman, earning the respect of directors who admired his relentless preparation and professionalism. Even when films struggled at the box office, Critics often singled him out as one of their strongest performers. Yet success remained frustratingly out of reach. He became known as the actor other actors respected, while mainstream audiences barely knew his name. Looking back, it's almost impossible to believe that one of cinema's most iconic heroes was still fighting for recognition after more than a decade of hard work. Then, almost overnight, a phone call arrived that would rewrite not only his career, but the history of one of the greatest fantasy films ever made. And the incredible story behind that casting is even more surprising than most fans realize. The opportunity that finally changed everything didn't begin with good news. The Lord of the Rings was already deep into production when serious concerns emerged about the actor originally cast as Aragorn. The filmmakers realized they needed someone who could convincingly carry the weight of a future king, both physically and emotionally. Time was running out, and replacing such an important character at the last minute was an enormous risk. Then Viggo Mortensen's name entered the conversation. He wasn't the obvious Hollywood superstar the studio expected, but Peter Jackson believed he possessed something far more valuable: authenticity. There was just one problem. Viggo wasn't eager to accept the offer. Before we reveal why he almost walked away from the role that defined his career, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Because what happened next wasn't just a casting decision. It became movie history. When the offer finally reached Viggo, his first reaction wasn't excitement, it was hesitation. The production would require months in New Zealand, thousands of miles from home, at a time when his young son, Henry, was still growing up. For Viggo, family had always come before fame, and he wasn't convinced that even a massive fantasy trilogy was worth missing precious time with his child. While many actors would have accepted the role without thinking twice, he seriously considered saying no. Then Henry learned what his father was turning down. Already a devoted fan of Tolkien's novels, he couldn't believe the opportunity sitting in front of them. Instead of encouraging caution, he urged his father to go, insisting that this was a chance too special to ignore. That simple conversation changed everything. Within days, Viggo was packing his bags, unaware that he was about to step into one of cinema's most unforgettable roles. Arriving in New Zealand wasn't the triumphant beginning many fans imagine. Viggo walked onto one of the biggest film productions ever assembled with almost no preparation. The rest of the cast had already spent weeks rehearsing together, building friendships, mastering sword choreography, and settling into their characters. He had none of that. Suddenly, he was expected to become Aragorn almost overnight. His earliest scenes reveal a subtle uncertainty that many viewers only noticed years later. But instead of hurting the performance, that uncertainty unexpectedly made Aragorn feel even more believable. At this point in the story, the character himself is hiding from his destiny, unsure whether he truly belongs as the future king. Viggo's real-life adjustment blended perfectly with Aragorn's emotional journey, creating an honesty that couldn't have been rehearsed. Sometimes the greatest performances aren't carefully planned. They emerge from real moments of vulnerability. Once filming truly began, something remarkable happened. Viggo stopped acting like a man playing Aragorn and started living as him. He trained endlessly with swords, until handling a blade became second nature. He spent countless hours horseback riding, developing such a strong connection with the animals that he later bought the horse he rode during filming, and even purchased another horse, connected to the production, when it needed a new home. He insisted on using a real steel sword whenever possible, because lighter props never felt convincing to him. Crew members often spotted him practicing between scenes while everyone else rested. That relentless commitment impressed not only Peter Jackson, but the entire cast. Slowly, the quiet newcomer who had arrived with almost no preparation became the heart of the fellowship. Yet there was one person watching his dedication especially closely, and his opinion meant more than anyone else's. By the time filming reached its biggest battle sequences, Viggo's commitment had become legendary across the set. During one scene, he kicked a heavy helmet with so much force that he broke 2 toes. The scream audiences hear in the finished film wasn't performed. It was completely real. On another occasion, he chipped a tooth while filming and reportedly visited a dentist still wearing parts of his costume, so production wouldn't lose valuable time. Even Peter Jackson became so accustomed to seeing him as Aragorn that he sometimes addressed him by the character's name instead of his own. Everyone recognized that Viggo wasn't chasing perfection for publicity. He simply believed audiences deserved complete honesty. That attitude earned enormous respect from the cast, but no one's admiration carried more weight than Christopher Lee's. The legendary actor had spent decades mastering swords, history, and storytelling. And before long, he began noticing something unusually genuine about the man playing Aragorn. Christopher Lee wasn't just another veteran actor joining an epic fantasy film. By the time he stepped onto the set of The Lord of the Rings, he had already lived a life that sounded more like fiction than reality. Born in London in 1922, Lee served during the Second World War, before becoming one of cinema's most recognizable faces. Over the decades, he built an extraordinary career playing unforgettable villains. Yet there was far more beneath the surface than audiences ever saw. He spoke several languages, studied history with genuine passion, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of mythology and classic literature. Most remarkably, he was the only member of the cast who had personally met J.R.R. Tolkien, years before the films were ever imagined. To many younger actors, Lee was already a legend. But to Viggo Mortensen, he soon became something even more valuable, a living connection to the world they were trying to bring to life. And that connection quickly turned into an unexpected friendship. While many cast members relaxed between takes, Viggo and Christopher Lee often drifted into long conversations away from the cameras. They spoke about ancient legends, European folklore, forgotten languages, and the historical influences behind Tolkien's writing. These weren't discussions designed to impress anyone. They were simply two curious minds enjoying subjects they genuinely loved. Viggo had always been fascinated by history and culture, while Lee carried decades of knowledge gathered through reading, travel, and personal experience. The more they talked, the clearer it became that they approached acting in remarkably similar ways. Neither man believed fantasy should feel artificial. Every sword, every line of dialogue, and every small detail deserved to be treated as though it belonged to a real world. That shared philosophy created a quiet bond, built on mutual respect rather than celebrity. Before long, Lee began paying close attention to the way Viggo prepared for his scenes, and what he noticed surprised even him. One detail immediately caught Christopher Lee's attention: Viggo's sword work. Unlike many actors who relied almost entirely on choreographed movements, Viggo practiced constantly, carrying his sword whenever he could and treating it like an extension of himself. He wasn't simply memorizing fight sequences. He wanted every movement to feel instinctive. Lee, who had participated in countless sword fights throughout his long film career, recognized the difference almost instantly. Experience had taught him that audiences could sense authenticity, even if they couldn't explain why. According to members of the production, Lee admired Viggo's natural commitment and understood that he wasn't performing for praise. He genuinely wanted to honor the character. Coming from an actor whose standards were famously high, that quiet respect meant more than any glowing review from critics. But the greatest lesson Lee would ever share wasn't about fighting at all. It happened during the filming of one unforgettable scene that left everyone listening. As filming continued, Peter Jackson prepared one of Saruman's most dramatic moments. Like any director, he wanted the scene to feel powerful, and he offered Christopher Lee guidance on how the character should react after being stabbed from behind. Before cameras rolled, Lee politely stopped him. Without raising his voice or creating tension, He explained that the reaction being described wasn't realistic. Someone struck in that way, he said, wouldn't let out a loud, dramatic scream because the air simply wouldn't allow it. Instead, the sound would be brief, strained, and almost impossible to fake convincingly. The set fell completely silent. Lee wasn't speaking from theory or research. He was recalling something he had personally witnessed many years earlier. Peter Jackson immediately accepted the correction, recognizing that no amount of filmmaking could compete with real-life experience. Standing nearby, Viggo absorbed every word, realizing he was witnessing far more than an acting discussion. For Viggo Mortensen, that quiet exchange became one of the defining memories of the entire trilogy. He had spent years pushing himself physically, believing authenticity came through preparation, discipline, and total commitment. Christopher Lee showed him there was another kind of authenticity, one that couldn't be learned in rehearsals or perfected through endless practice. It came from a lifetime of experiences that shaped the way a person saw the world. Lee carried history with him every time he stepped in front of the camera, and without trying to teach anyone, he demonstrated how truth could transform even the smallest performance. Viggo would later speak about Lee with enormous admiration, describing him as someone whose presence elevated everyone around him. The lessons he learned during those conversations didn't end when filming wrapped. In many ways, they became the foundation for every major decision Viggo made throughout the rest of his remarkable career. And after The Lord of the Rings, those lessons would be tested in ways few actors ever experience. When The Lord of the Rings finally wrapped, most actors left New Zealand with unforgettable memories, lifelong friendships, and careers that would never be the same. Viggo Mortensen left with something even more valuable, a completely different understanding of what it meant to be an artist. Watching Christopher Lee work had reinforced an idea he already believed but had never fully understood. Authenticity wasn't about showing off how hard you worked. It was about respecting the story enough to tell it honestly. Every decision, from learning a new skill to understanding a character's history, mattered because audiences could sense when something felt genuine. That philosophy stayed with Viggo long after Aragorn's sword was put away. He knew he could spend the rest of his career repeating the same heroic role, but that wasn't what interested him. The greatest lesson Lee left behind wasn't how to perform. It was how to choose the right path, even when it was the harder one. And Viggo was about to prove he had learned it well. Many fans only remember Christopher Lee as Dracula, Saruman, or one of cinema's greatest villains. But those who knew him understood there was another side to him entirely. Away from the cameras, Lee had an endless curiosity that never faded with age. He loved music, literature, history, and languages with the same passion he brought to acting. Even in his later years, when most performers would have slowed down, he surprised the world by recording heavy metal albums, embracing a genre few expected from a man in his 80s. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was simply another creative challenge he wanted to experience. That fearless attitude deeply impressed Viggo, who had always pursued interests outside Hollywood as well. Whether it was photography, painting, poetry, or publishing books through his own independent press, Viggo believed creativity shouldn't be limited to blockbuster films. In Christopher Lee, he saw someone who had spent an entire lifetime proving exactly that. Perhaps the strongest connection between the two actors had nothing to do with The Lord of the Rings at all. It came from the choices they made when nobody was watching. Neither man measured success by awards, magazine covers, or massive paychecks. Instead, they searched for projects that challenged them creatively, even if those projects reached smaller audiences. Viggo founded a publishing company to support poetry, photography, and artistic work that larger publishers often ignored. Christopher Lee continued exploring music, recording, and literature, simply because those passions brought him joy. Both men understood that real fulfillment comes from creating something meaningful, rather than something merely popular. That shared outlook strengthened their friendship, and quietly shaped the way Viggo viewed the rest of his career. As Hollywood chased bigger franchises and safer investments, he found himself moving in the opposite direction, and that decision surprised almost everyone in the industry. After the incredible success of The Lord of the Rings, countless opportunities landed on Viggo Mortensen's doorstep. Studios knew audiences loved Aragorn, and many expected him to spend the next decade playing similar larger-than-life heroes. It would have been the easiest path imaginable, offering financial security and worldwide fame. But Viggo wasn't interested in repeating himself. He reportedly passed on several franchise opportunities because they didn't offer anything creatively new. Even when discussions arose about expanding Aragorn's role in later Tolkien adaptations, he chose to stay faithful to the original story, rather than return simply because it would guarantee another hit. For many actors, walking away from that kind of success would seem impossible. For Viggo, it felt completely natural. The lessons he had absorbed from Christopher Lee encouraged him to protect the integrity of his work instead of chasing popularity. That choice led him toward some of the most demanding performances of his entire career. Instead of selecting comfortable roles, Viggo deliberately sought characters that pushed him into unfamiliar territory. His collaboration with director David Cronenberg produced performances that critics praised for their emotional depth and fearless commitment. For Eastern Promises, he immersed himself in Russian culture, carefully studying accents, customs, and even the hidden meanings behind prison tattoos, until the character felt completely authentic. In The Road, he transformed himself physically to portray a father struggling through a devastated world, embracing discomfort to capture the story's emotional reality. Later, Captain Fantastic and Green Book earned him additional Academy Award nominations, proving that his career after Aragorn was anything but predictable. Each performance reflected the same philosophy audiences first witnessed in Middle-earth: complete dedication, quiet preparation, and absolute respect for the truth behind every character. Looking back, it's impossible not to notice the lasting influence Christopher Lee had on that approach, and the final chapter of their story is perhaps the most meaningful of all. By the time Viggo Mortensen reached his 60s, he had already achieved what most actors spend a lifetime chasing. He had starred in one of the biggest film trilogies ever made, earned multiple Academy Award nominations, and gained the respect of directors across the industry. Yet none of those accomplishments changed the way he approached his work. Every new role still demanded the same level of preparation he had shown decades earlier. He continued learning new skills, researching the worlds his characters lived in, and refusing to rely on shortcuts simply because of his reputation. That consistency wasn't about proving himself anymore. It had become part of who he was. Looking back, it's difficult to separate that mindset from the influence Christopher Lee quietly had during those months in New Zealand. Lee never delivered speeches about professionalism or success. Instead, he demonstrated through his own actions that excellence isn't something you reach, it's something you practice every single day. And that lesson stayed with Viggo long after the cameras stopped rolling. Christopher Lee passed away in June 2015 at the age of 93, bringing an end to one of the most remarkable careers in entertainment. Tributes poured in from around the world, not only because of the unforgettable characters he portrayed, but because of the extraordinary life he had lived beyond the screen. Those who worked alongside him often described him as intelligent, generous, endlessly curious, and deeply respectful of storytelling. For Viggo Mortensen, Lee's passing wasn't simply the loss of a legendary co-star. It was the loss of someone who had quietly become a mentor without ever trying to be one. Their conversations between takes, their shared appreciation for history and language, and the unforgettable moments they experienced together had left a lasting impression. Years later, whenever Viggo speaks about Christopher Lee, there's a level of admiration that goes far beyond ordinary Hollywood compliments. It's the respect one craftsman has for another whose example permanently changed the way he viewed his own work. Perhaps that's why Viggo has never described The Lord of the Rings as merely the project that made him famous. Fame eventually fades, awards gather dust, and even blockbuster films become part of history. But the people we meet during those moments often leave a far deeper mark than the success itself. For Viggo, Christopher Lee represented something incredibly rare, a living bridge between history, literature, and cinema. Here was a man who had personally known J.R.R. Tolkien, witnessed world-changing events, mastered countless creative pursuits, and still approached every scene with humility and discipline. Sharing a set with someone like that wasn't just another acting job. It became an education that no classroom could ever provide. Every conversation reinforced the idea that the greatest artists never stop learning. They remain students, no matter how accomplished they become. And Viggo carried that philosophy into every chapter of his career that followed. When fans remember The Lord of the Rings, they often think about breathtaking battles, unforgettable speeches, and the emotional journey of Aragorn becoming king. But behind those iconic moments was another story that never appeared on screen. It was the story of two actors from completely different generations, discovering a shared commitment to honesty, craftsmanship, and respect for storytelling. One had spent decades building an extraordinary life before arriving in Middle-earth. The other was stepping into the role that would define his career. Their friendship didn't rely on publicity or dramatic headlines. It grew quietly through conversations, shared interests, and mutual admiration. In many ways, Christopher Lee gave Viggo something far greater than acting advice. He reminded him that every performance should be grounded in truth, no matter how fantastical the setting may be. That invisible lesson became one of the trilogy's greatest legacies, one audiences could feel, even if they never knew the story behind it. Years have passed since the final journey through Middle-earth, yet the bond between Viggo Mortensen and Christopher Lee continues to inspire fans around the world. Looking back, it's remarkable that one of the trilogy's most meaningful stories happened away from the cameras, hidden between rehearsals and conversations that few people ever witnessed. Viggo may always be remembered as Aragorn, but perhaps the greatest gift he received from those films wasn't the sword, the fame, or the worldwide recognition. It was the chance to learn from someone whose life embodied courage, curiosity, and unwavering dedication to the truth. Christopher Lee showed that authenticity can't be manufactured. It grows from experience, humility, and a lifelong commitment to learning. And maybe that's the real reason their story still resonates today. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Has someone in your own life ever changed the way you see the world without even realizing it? Share your story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey behind one of Hollywood's most unforgettable friendships, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.